What's up, guys? Austin here with another Fantasy LCS preview, this time for Week 6. Now, you may have noticed some changes to the show for my regular audience. I would like to note that I have removed the mailbox segment, and I've actually replaced it with this Twitter handle above, where you can send me Fantasy LCS related questions or concerns that I may not have covered in this specific episode. So let's go ahead and begin this week by covering a quick overview of LCS related headlines that may be impacting your fantasy outlook. So as of Tuesday, which is when I'm making this video, by the way, Tuesday afternoon, we are still unsure whether or not Inori will be making his return to the LCS stage. Of course, last week, former Cloud9 jungler Meteos filled in during P1's 2-0 campaign, in which they actually defeated number one seed Cloud9. Now, I will have more on Meteos and Inori coming up in a few minutes in another segment. Now, Team Liquid announced prior to the IEM break that they would be holding open tryouts for their roster. As far as fantasy is concerned, I do not consider anyone besides Piglet or Reignover to be even considered for a fantasy roster. I think you can definitely make the justification for those two guys. However, unless you're in an 8-man league and you really need to have those NA players, I wouldn't consider Team Liquid guys, even if they do head into this week with a slightly altered roster. And finally, hopefully this one does not impact too many of you guys because Fnatic is not playing 2 matches this week, so hopefully you do not have any Fnatic players in your lineup, and even more so, hopefully you do not have Amazing in your lineup because he has actually been benched a week or two ago. But Amazing has actually joined Fnatic Academy from the Tier 1 Fnatic roster. So those are your headlines heading into Week 6 of Fantasy LCS. Let's go ahead and take on a full fantasy approach as we look at some trades that you guys should consider for this upcoming week. So across the pond, we have UOL and Misfits playing in 2 matchups this weekend. However, they're actually going to kick off the LCS action by facing each other. So UOLs have a phenomenal split, but they're coming off a rather lackluster performance at IEM Katowice. Both teams do hold an impressive 5-1 record heading into this weekend. Now, despite their tough outing in Poland, I'm actually leaning towards UOL to win the series and put up slightly higher fantasy numbers. As a team, UOL has combined for 240 total kills, as opposed to only 179 by Misfits. Now, I would like to note real quick that these two teams are in the top 3 for fewest total deaths in the EU LCS. And so I think what's important to consider here is when we have 2 teams that are fairly even caliber coming to match up against each other, often from a fantasy perspective especially, we expect a very high kill total. We expect a lot of team fight oriented gameplay. I would be cautious. I would temper those expectations for this particular matchup just because of how careful, calculated, and cautious these 2 teams play. However, having said that, I still believe they are 2 phenomenal fantasy options for this week, and you should definitely consider adding those guys to your starting roster. Now, Immortals have faced a disappointing start to the split, but they are in prime position to turn their fate around. This week, they'll take on Envy and Liquid, 2 teams in the relegation zone. Now, in 4 to 6-man leagues, several Immortals players should still be open for grabs. Perhaps not Dardoch or Pobelter, but guys like Flame and Cody Sun should still be available should you need or want to pursue those options. Now, quickly from NA back over to EU one more time. We are taking a look at H2K and G2, and it is finally time, guys, to go ahead and drop those players if you were hiding them on your bench. The heavyweights of Europe won't be playing 2 matches again in a single week until week 10, and as far as we're concerned, that is irrelevant because Fantasy LCS ends in week 9. So go ahead and drop those guys from your roster in order to pave way for some new talent. Now, time for Hot or Not, everyone's favorite segment. This week we have a special rivalry edition, NA's most historic rivalry, I believe, TSM and CLG. Now let's begin with TSM. TSM completed a 2-0 sweep last week to secure their 8th series win, tying them atop the table with Cloud9, whom they defeated. Now TSM is hot and just in time for the second half of the split. With 3 veteran players on their roster, Bjergsen, Svenskeren, and Wild Turtle, they look primed to dominate Week 6 and beyond. Now of all the North American teams heading into Week 6, CLG has one of the toughest schedules, unfortunately. They'll take on P1 and, of course, their bitter rival, TSM. Now, CLG presents a very high-risk, high-reward pick this weekend, I believe. On one hand, they could have very close teamfight-oriented matchups against their foes, resulting in a lot of fantasy points. However, they're also in great danger of being swept by 2 very tough opponents. So, my advice for CLG this week is, if you're someone who normally starts, let's say, 3 CLG players, perhaps even 2, I would go ahead and cut that number down by 1 or 2. So if you normally start 3 CLG players, let's say you're in a 4 to 6 man league and you were able to get 3 players from the same team and that was CLG, I would go ahead and drop that number down to 1 or 2. Those 2 guys probably being Stixay and either Smithy or Darshan. I think they still could put up a lot of points this week, but the risk really, I don't know, it makes it a little bit of a concern for me. Now let's go ahead and get cozy because it's time to take a look at this week's sleeper picks. Now first up we have Meteos, who I mentioned we would get back to, and we have now reached that point in the show. So as of today, Tuesday, I don't know if I mentioned that already, that's when I'm making this, it's Tuesday afternoon. We still don't know if Inori will be returning from Vancouver, which I believe is where he is right now, dealing with personal matters. Of course, we wish the best to him and whomever he's with. But we do not know if he's returning for P1 this weekend officially. Now, right now, I would like to note, and I think this is a very strong indicator that we can expect Inori to be sidelined for at least 1 more week. Meteos is estimated to receive points on the Fantasy LCS website, as well as being listed as the starter for both series this weekend against their opponents against P1's opponents on the LOL Esports website. So I think he'll be the starter, and if he's available in your leagues, which he should be, unless you had some king guys last week who perhaps foresaw Inori being out for an extended period of time, I think Meteos is a great jungler to look at. Now, lastly, in my sleeper segment, we have Dignitas. Following the addition of Coach Kopp, Dignitas actually went 2-0. Keen was the 4th highest scoring player in the first 2 games format for Week 5. However, they will have their hands full this weekend. They face the same opponents as CLG. Unfortunately, tough for them. It is P1 and TSM. Now, I would not be afraid to start Keen as a flex option if I needed to. I feel confident in that. I would also not be too afraid if I really needed to start Sunday or Chaser in their top or jungle respectively. I think coming off that 2-0 week, I think they have some momentum. Obviously, this was a team that we expected anyway to be at the very top of the table coming into this split. And I think now that they have that momentum swing as well as a bye week during IEM to mesh more with Coach Kopp and prepare for their tough opponents this week, I think they're an okay sleeper option. Now let's go ahead and wrap up this week's episode with another edition of Report Card. So for those of you who are new to the show, this is a segment in which I review my picks from last week to see what I got correct or incorrect, and hopefully I didn't screw you guys over too bad. Now, last week was a shorter episode, so there's not as much as usual to review. Splice and TSM fared very well. However, I did, in fact, let you guys down with my Echo Fox pick, and for that, I do apologize. Froggen did not live up to his normal Froggen self, and neither did Acadian. But hopefully we are going to turn those around this week. I feel pretty confident in my advice. Now, thank you all for watching this episode of Fantasy LCS Preview. Remember to like and subscribe for more Fantasy LCS content. Send questions to that Twitter handle somewhere above if you have any concerns that I did not cover in this particular episode. And good luck in Week 6.